Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds with us now. We can't afford these pay rises that the unions are asking for.
Well, let's unpack this a little bit. Now, when ministers say they can't afford it, there's a little bit of truth in that because the economy hasn't done very well for 12 years under them. And so any resources we've got to spend on public services are diminished on what they should be. So I think what they should add to their sentences there is, if we can't afford it, it's their fault to do so. However, there are things government can do. What I worry listening to those collection of cabinet ministers there is, they think they've got an opportunity here to deflect from the fact that they haven't run the economy and public services very well, and they can somehow blame working people or unions by highlighting the strikes as the strikes are the symptom of how badly they have run things, and particularly on the NHS. You know, everyone should recognise the pay issue is also about workload and burden on NHS staff. And there are things the government could do. They could, for instance, take our plan, which the future Labour government would abandon the non-dom rule, the special tax regime for the super rich.
Pay for everything.
Well, but it would pay, in this case, what we would use the money for a significant expansion of the NHS workforce in terms of more doctors, more district health visitors, more midwives, more nurses. That would help a great deal. And I think if you're a government minister, you've got to roll up your sleeves and try and resolve these disputes. Nobody wants to take industrial action. They don't want to lose the money, but they also don't want to see the impact on the public. But if the government won't listen to them, what option have people got but to try and make themselves heard by taking that action? So there are things the government could do, and it's not good enough to come on and just be passive and say, look, we're somehow commentating on this. They've got to get involved and resolve these disputes.
So you'd use the non-dom money for pay in the National Health Service and others. What about the eco plans that you have got to make us all a little bit greener at home? How would you pay for that?
Well, those plans are about investment spending. So where we would increase revenue spending, for instance, on the NHS, we will always identify the resource. Well, all government spending, capital spending, is borrowing, and the question is the return you get for doing that greater than the cost of investing? So I think the case on climate change is absolutely clear that the costs of not doing anything are far more extensive than taking action. But crucially, what you get with our plans our ability to get the green jobs of the future, the good skilled work that's available, whether that's in new nuclear or new renewables or energy efficiency measures in people's homes, and get the benefit of that. This could be, for the UK, the biggest economic opportunity for many, many years. And we don't want to be following the rest of the world. We want to be leading. We want to be a clean energy superpower, exporting that power, exporting the technology and the innovation that we've got in the UK. But the government's got to lead on that.
Yes, so you would borrow more than the government is planning to borrow then if you were in power?
Well, this government borrows money, for instance, to pay for tax cuts for the well-off.
But you still have to pay it back.
The test of borrowing is about whether you're investing it and you'll get a greater return from investing it than you would from not taking that action. Now, I don't think anyone can seriously say we shouldn't respond to net zero. We shouldn't, for instance, make sure that we are in line with our international commitments. But what we want to do is get the maximum economic benefit for the UK of doing that. So give me one specific example. You know, this country has about 750,000 people working in the automotive industry. So it's a jewel in the crown of our industrial base. If we do not invest to make sure we've got battery production for electric vehicles in the UK, we won't just fail to seize that opportunity, we'll lose those existing jobs. And that requires the government investing a little bit of money to make sure there's a greater amount of private investment coming in. That's how other countries have done it. That's why Germany is so far ahead of the UK, for instance. So it's about making sure you're clearly identifying the opportunities. And if you need to invest some government money to do that because the return is greater, yes. But it's not about borrowing more money for day-to-day spending. That's where this government went wrong.
And what should we do about onshore wind farms? Just to underline, I think Labour are in favour of more. But we're hearing that it's an issue that is splitting this government. Some of them are a little bit NIMBY, and some of them are saying, no, it's what we need. What would you say to the government this morning?
Well, we've been making the case for quite a few years now, since they had the de facto ban on onshore wind, that it makes no sense to ban the cheapest form of energy production. I mean, as it stands
Light
today,
on the landscape, says David Davis.
Well, that isn't what the public see this as. Every single poll shows that actually a lot of Conservative MPs are out of step with the public on this. But to have a position where you completely ban the cheapest form of energy production, even if people are very much in favour in an area or if it's a particularly appropriate thing. I actually think wind farms look very attractive. I'm used to seeing them on the landscape. I think they make quite a wonderful contribution to that. But most of all, if you look at how much damage has been done by this energy crisis where, the price of fossil fuels has absolutely spiked. The idea you don't try and reduce your dependency on that volatility, you don't see the opportunity, you don't use safe, secure, clean forms of energy in the UK. How can that make sense? And as ever, what we see with this government is, no matter what the Prime Minister or any cabinet ministers might come on and say, every issue is determined by the internal politics of the Conservative Party, by the divisions they've got, and it's just no way to run a country.
Should we be sending Albanians who are seeking asylum back the moment that they step foot on British soil?
Look, where we have illegal entry into the UK, what we've got to have is a system that resolves those claims on the timescale that people quite rightly expect and which we need. I think we've got the worst of all worlds at the minute, where people who should be being granted asylum in the UK aren't getting an answer clearly enough, and people who should be removed aren't being removed enough. But if you're only going to process, I think this government's 2% of the claims that were made last year, it doesn't matter what else you do, the system isn't going to work. They should take the money they're wasting on gimmicks like Rwanda and spend it on processing these claims, having the capacity we need, and everything else, I think, is just froth.
OK, does Labour think that Albania is a safe country?
I think it's not helpful to single out particular countries.
Well, I'm asking you about Albania. Do you think it's a safe country?
There are organised criminality issues about certain countries, but I think what we've got to acknowledge is the system as a whole, doesn't matter what country people are coming from, you cannot have a system that simply doesn't get to the bottom of whether claims should be upheld or not.
But if it's a safe country, they shouldn't be coming from there. I mean, that's what the law says.
If it's a safe country, you shouldn't be claiming
OK, so is Albania a safe country?
I think in the main, Albania is a safe country.
So they shouldn't be here, so they should be sent back?
Well, I think, look, again, focusing on...
You're agreeing with David Davis?
The government are attempting to try and put this on particular countries rather than accept their own failings, that the system isn't working as it should do. So our focus should be on demanding of this government an efficient, fair system with the capacity it needs to resolve these claims. And that's nothing else will do unless the government acknowledges their own failings on that key issue.